Long before anyone thought to write things down, the land we now call Hungary had tenants. We're talking way, way back. The first folks to call the Pannonian Basin home weren't exactly building cities, they were Neanderthals, tough characters who hunted in the hills around places like Erd, probably chasing after whatever they could catch for dinner. For them, life was a daily grind of survival, a constant search for food and shelter. It was a dirty job, no doubt about it, and it went on for tens of thousands of years. They left behind little more than stone tools and the occasional bone, silent witnesses to a life that was raw, unforgiving, and completely connected to the land under their feet. It was the ultimate long-term lease, and they were the original occupants. Then, around 6000 BC, things started to change. A new group of people showed up, and they brought a revolutionary idea with them: farming. These weren't the hunters of the old world. The people of the Starcevo-Koros culture decided that chasing their food was too much work. Why not make the food grow right where you live? They started planting crops and raising animals, a fundamental shift in how humans interacted with the world. This wasn't just a new job, it was a whole new career path for the human race. They also got into pottery, creating the first containers to store their hard-earned grain. It was the dawn of a new era, built on the simple but powerful idea of settling down. These early farmers weren't just making pots, they were laying the groundwork for civilization. The linear pottery culture followed, spreading their agricultural techniques even further. They lived in small villages, in longhouses made of timber and mud, a far cry from the caves of their predecessors. Life was still hard, of course. They had to clear forests, till the soil with primitive tools, and hope the weather cooperated. A bad harvest could mean disaster for the whole community. But for the first time, people had a reason to stay put. They were investing in the land, building something that would last longer than a single hunting season. They were turning a piece of wild earth into a home. So when you think about the history of Hungary, it doesn't start with kings and castles. It starts much earlier. With the grunt work of survival, it begins with the Neanderthal hunter trying to outsmart a mammoth, and the Neolithic farmer anxiously watching the sky for rain. These were the pioneers, the ones who did the dirty jobs that made everything else possible. They shaped the land, and in turn, the land shaped them. They were the first in a long line of people who would fight for, bleed for, and ultimately build a nation in this very spot. Their story is written not in books but in the soil itself. After the farmers got things started, the next big leap forward came from a different kind of workshop. Around 2500 BC, someone figured out how to mix copper and tin to make bronze. This changed everything. Suddenly you had a material that was harder than stone and more durable than anything that came before it. This was the Bronze Age, and it brought a new level of sophistication to the Pannonian Basin. The Ottoman culture, for example, became master metalworkers. They weren't just making tools. They were creating intricate artifacts, weapons, and jewelry. They were craftsmen, turning raw ore into objects of both beauty and power. These weren't just small, scattered villages anymore either. With bronze came better weapons, and with better weapons came the need for better defenses. People started building fortified settlements, some with moats and stone walls. This was a sign that society was getting more complex, and maybe a little less friendly. You don't build a wall unless you're worried about who might be on the other side. These settlements were the first real towns, centers of trade and power. The folks in charge were the ones who controlled the resources, the mines for copper and tin, and the craftsmen who knew the secrets of turning them into bronze. It was an early form of industry, and it was serious business. Then came the next upgrade. Around the 9th century BC, a new technology arrived: iron. Iron was tougher, more plentiful, and ultimately, more democratic than bronze. You didn't need to control specific trade routes for tin to make it. This kicked off the Iron Age. The first to bring this know-how were likely ancient Iranian tribes, followed by Illyrians and Celts. The Celts in particular left a big mark on the region. They were skilled warriors and artisans, but they also introduced another game-changing innovation: minting coins. Before coins, trade was all about bartering. My 3 chickens for your pot. It was messy and complicated. Coins streamlined the whole process. Now, value was standardized. A coin had a recognized worth, which made trade easier, faster, and possible over much longer distances. It was the birth of a real economy. This meant more than just swapping goods. It meant the movement of ideas, cultures, and people. The Pannonian Basin was becoming a crossroads, a place where different groups met, traded, and sometimes fought. The Celts weren't just passing through, they established themselves, building fortified towns called oppida, and leaving behind a legacy of art and technology. The land was once again being transformed, not by farmers but by miners, blacksmiths, and merchants. Now let's talk about the people who would eventually give Hungary its name, the Magyars. Their story doesn't start in the Carpathian Basin. It begins thousands of miles to the east, in the cold forests of western Siberia. Linguists and historians have pieced together the evidence, and it points to an origin near the Ural Mountains, somewhere between the Ob and Irtysh rivers. Here, the ancestors of the Hungarians were part of a larger group of Uralic Finnic tribes. They were hunters and fishermen, living a life dictated by the harsh seasons of the north. Sometime in the first millennium BC, their language began to split off, forming the unique Ugric branch that would one day become Hungarian. But you don't stay in Siberia forever, especially when the climate starts to change or other, bigger tribes start pushing you around. Sometime in the first few centuries AD, the Magyars began a slow, westward migration. This wasn't a single, organized road trip, it was a centuries-long drift across the vast Eurasian steppe. Along the way, they learned some new tricks. They encountered Scythian and Sarmatian peoples, who were masters of horsemanship and metalworking. From them, the Magyars learned how to fight from horseback and how to forge better tools and weapons. They were adapting, picking up new skills to survive in a tough neighborhood. By the 8th century, they had made it to a land they called Levadia, located near the Don River, on the edge of the powerful Khazar Khaganate. The Khazars were a major regional power, and the Magyars lived as their vassals for a time. They paid tribute to the Khazar ruler, but they also learned a lot about political organization and military strategy. Their leader at this time was a man named Levedi, for whom the land was named. This period was like an apprenticeship. The Magyars were no longer just a loose collection of forest hunters, they were becoming a formidable steppe people, a confederation of tribes with a shared culture and a growing sense of identity. This long journey was the crucible that forged the Magyar people. Every step of the way, they had to adapt or perish. They transitioned from a forest-dwelling people to nomadic pastoralists, their lives revolving around their herds of horses and cattle. The steppe was a harsh teacher. It demanded constant movement, vigilance, and a warrior spirit. This lifestyle created a society that was mobile, resilient, and militarily skilled. They were a people on the move, unknowingly heading towards a final destination they couldn't yet imagine. Their epic trek across the continent was far from over, but the foundation of their future nation was being laid with every mile they traveled. While the Magyars were slowly making their way west, the Carpathian Basin was a busy place. It was prime real estate, and a lot of powerful groups wanted a piece of it. At the end of the 1st century BC, the ultimate landlords of the ancient world showed up. The Romans. They conquered the region and established the province of Pannonia. For the next 400 years, Rome was in charge. They did what they always did. They built things. They laid down straight roads, constructed aqueducts, and founded cities like Aquincum, which is now part of Budapest. They brought their laws, their language, and their legions. The Romans turned Pannonia into a fortified frontier of their empire. They built forts and watchtowers along the Danube River to keep out the barbarian tribes on the other side. This was a place where two worlds collided. Inside the Roman province you had villas with heated floors, bustling marketplaces, and even the early spread of Christianity. It was a pocket of Mediterranean civilization in the heart of Europe. But this stability couldn't last forever. The Roman Empire began to weaken, and by the early 5th century they had bigger problems to deal with. In the 420s they officially handed over Pannonia to a new and terrifying power that had emerged from the east, the Huns. The Huns, under their legendary leader Attila, created a vast and short-lived empire. From their base in Pannonia, they terrorized both the Eastern and Western Roman empires, extracting massive amounts of gold and tribute. Attila was the most feared man of his time, the scourge of God, but his empire was built around his own personal power. When he died in 453, it all fell apart. The Huns were defeated by a coalition of their former subjects, and they vanished from history almost as quickly as they had appeared. Their collapse left a power vacuum in the Carpathian Basin, and a new series of tenants moved in. For the next few centuries, the region was a chaotic mess of competing tribes. First came the Ostrogoths, then the Gepids, then the Lombards. Each group fought for control, but none could hold it for long. Then in 567, a new force arrived, the Avars. A Turkic-speaking people from the steppes, the Avars established a powerful kingdom, or Khaganate, that dominated the region for over 200 years. Like the Huns before them, they were skilled horsemen and warriors. They ruled over the local Slavic populations and frequently clashed with the neighboring Byzantine and Frankish empires. But like all empires, theirs eventually crumbled due to internal conflicts and external pressure, creating yet another opening for the next group waiting in the wings. Back on the steppes, the Magyars were facing their own problems. Life in Levidia, under the shadow of the Khazars, came to an end. They were pushed out by a rival tribe, the Pechenegs, another tough group of traveling warriors. This defeat forced the Magyars to move again, this time to a place they called Edelkoz, which means land between the rivers. It was probably located between the Dnieper and Dniester rivers. It was here, facing constant dangers from outside, that they realized they needed to get organized. Surviving on the steppe wasn't a job for a loose group of families. It needed everyone to work together and have a clear leader. This is where one of the most important stories in Hungarian history happens. The leaders of the 7 Magyar tribes, along with the leader of the Kabars, a group of Khazar rebels who had joined them, came together to form a team. According to stories, they made this team official with a special ceremony, the blood oath. The 7 chiefs, Almos, Elad, Kond, Tas, Huba, Tohodom, and And, cut their arms and let their blood flow into one cup. They drank from this mix, promising to always be loyal to each other and to their chosen leader, Almos, and his children. This promise wasn't just a symbol, it was a strong agreement that changed the Magyars from a group of related tribes into a united political and military power. They swore that they would always choose their leader from Almos's family, that they would share everything they won in battles, and that they would stand together against any enemy. This act created the Arpad family line, which would rule Hungary for the next 400 years. It was a formal way of saying that their survival depended on sticking together. They had created a nation on the move, a traveling kingdom built on loyalty and a shared future. Almos became the sacred leader of this new team, but the Magyars often had 2 leaders. While Almos had the spiritual power, the real military power would soon go to his son, Arpad, who had the title of, or, military commander. This way of sharing jobs made sense. There was a symbol of the people's unity and good luck from above, while there was the man who did the hard work, leading the armies in the field. This new, organized way of doing things made the Magyars stronger than ever before. They were no longer just people running from the Pechenegs. They were a disciplined force, ready to create a new future for themselves. The Magyars' time in Edelkoz was short-lived. The gears of history were turning, and they were about to be caught right in the middle. In the year 894, a message arrived from the most powerful man in the Christian world, the Byzantine emperor. He had a job for the Magyars. He needed some muscle to deal with his troublesome neighbors, the First Bulgarian Empire. The Magyars, led by Arpad, were happy to oblige. They were mercenaries, and the pay was good. They crossed the Danube and launched a fierce attack on the Bulgarians, causing a lot of damage and winning a swift victory for their Byzantine employers. But this easy win came with a heavy price. The Bulgarian ruler, Simeon I, was a clever and ruthless leader. He wasn't about to take this defeat lying down. He immediately sent envoys to the Magyars' old enemies, the Pechenegs, who were still lurking to the east. Simeon proposed a classic pincer move. He would attack the Magyar army from the south, while the Pechenegs would attack their homes and families in Edelkoz from the east. It was a brilliant and devastating strategy. The Magyar warriors, busy fighting in Bulgaria, were caught completely off guard. The Pechenegs swept into Edelkoz, burning their settlements and forcing the women, children, and elderly to flee for their lives. Suddenly, the Magyars were trapped. They were facing a war on 2 fronts, and their homeland was being overrun. There was no going back. Arpad had to make a choice, and he had to make it fast. The only way out was west, towards the one place that offered security and a chance to regroup, the Carpathian Basin. He had led scouting parties there before and knew the land was fertile and, at the time, poorly defended. The once mighty Avar Khaganate was gone, and the region was a patchwork of weaker Slavic principalities and Frankish territories. It was the perfect opportunity. And so, around the year 895, Arpad gathered his people and led them on their final migration. They poured through the passes of the Carpathian mountains, a whole nation on the move. Warriors, families, herds of cattle and horses. This wasn't a raid, it was a conquest. It was the culmination of a journey that had started centuries earlier in the forests of Siberia. As they descended into the great plain of Pannonia, they were leaving the uncertain life of the steppe behind for good. They were here to claim a new homeland, a place where they could finally put down roots. The dirty, dangerous job of taking it, however, was just beginning. Arriving in a new land is one thing. Holding on to it is another job entirely. The Carpathian Basin wasn't empty. The Magyars had to assert their control, and that meant fighting. They operated with a dual leadership system. Almos, the sacred leader, reportedly never set foot in the new land, dying mysteriously before or during the crossing, a sacrifice, some say, to ensure the success of his people. His son, Arpad, took over as the military commander, or Gyula, sharing power with another chief named Curzon, who held the title of Kenda. Together, they set about the difficult task of making this new territory their own. Their first order of business was to deal with the existing powers. Curzon led campaigns to the west, effectively destroying the once great Moravian Empire. They also pushed south, taking territory from the Bulgarians who had, ironically, pushed them into the Basin in the first place. But this expansion brought them into direct conflict with a major European power, the East Franks, the predecessors of the Germans. In 904, the Franks invited Curzon to a feast, supposedly to negotiate a peace treaty. It was a trap. They assassinated him and his entire entourage, hoping to decapitate the Magyar leadership. This left Arpad as the sole ruler, consolidating power in his hands. The Frankish strategy backfired spectacularly. Instead of weakening the Magyars, the assassination enraged them and united them behind Arpad. They wanted revenge. In 907, a massive Bavarian army marched into Pannonia, determined to wipe out the Magyar threat for good. The two forces met near Pressburg, which is modern-day Bratislava. The Magyars, using their classic steppe tactics of feigned retreats, ambushes, and swarms of mounted archers, completely annihilated the heavy, slow-moving Bavarian knights. It was a catastrophic defeat for the Bavarians. Their commander and most of their nobility were killed. The Battle of Pressburg secured the western frontier of the new Magyar homeland. With this victory, the Magyars cemented their control over the entire Carpathian Basin. They followed it up with another stunning win in 910 at the First Battle of Lechfeld, where they crushed another Frankish army. These battles weren't just about revenge or defense, they were a loud and clear message to the rest of Europe. The Magyars were here to stay. They had fought their way into the heart of the continent and had proven they could defeat the best armies the West could throw at them. The long, grueling job of migration was over. The even harder work of building a state had begun. Once they had secured their new home in the Carpathian Basin, the Magyars didn't just settle down and start farming. For the next half-century, they became the terror of Europe. This period is known as the Adventurous Raids. From their central base, their fast-moving cavalry armies launched lightning-quick campaigns across the continent. They weren't trying to conquer new lands. This was a business venture. They were after loot, gold, silver, precious goods, and slaves. They also fought as mercenaries for warring Italian, German, and French nobles, who were happy to pay them to attack their rivals. These raids were devastatingly effective, because the Magyars fought with a style that Western European armies were unprepared for. Their main weapon was the powerful composite bow, which they could fire with deadly accuracy from horseback. They avoided pitched battles with heavily armored knights whenever possible. Instead, they used hit-and-run tactics, showering their enemies with arrows from a distance. Their most famous tactic was the feigned retreat. They would pretend to flee in disarray, luring their overconfident opponents into a disorganized chase. Then, at a prearranged signal, they would turn and attack the exhausted and scattered enemy, destroying them completely. One of the most spectacular examples of their military genius was the Battle of the Brenta River in 899. An Italian army led by King Berengar I trapped a Magyar raiding party. Vastly outnumbered, the Magyars begged for a truce, offering to give up all their loot if they were allowed to leave peacefully. Berengar, confident of his victory, refused. So the Magyars launched a desperate charge, broke through the Italian lines in a feigned retreat, and crossed the river. The Italians, thinking the fight was over, broke ranks and started celebrating. That's when the Magyars charged back across the river and annihilated the unprepared army. It was a masterclass in psychological warfare and tactical discipline. These raids reached astonishing distances. Magyar war parties were seen in Saxony, Lombardy, Bavaria, deep into France, and even all the way to the Atlantic coast of Spain. For decades, the prayer "Save us, O Lord, from the arrows of the Hungarians" was common in many European churches. These campaigns brought immense wealth back to the Carpathian Basin, but they also created a fearsome reputation. The Magyars were seen as unstoppable scourges, a new wave of Huns sent to punish Christendom. But this way of life, built on raiding and plunder, couldn't last forever. Sooner or later, Europe would learn how to fight back. The era of the adventurous raids came to a sudden and brutal end in 955 at the Second Battle of Lechfeld near Augsburg. This time the German king Otto I was ready. He had learned from past defeats. He assembled a massive army of heavily armed, disciplined knights from all over his kingdom. When the Magyar army tried their usual tactics, they found that the German knights wouldn't break formation. The heavy cavalry charged, and this time, there was no escape. The Magyar army was crushed, their leaders were captured and publicly executed. It was a total disaster, a national trauma that forced a profound change in strategy. The defeat at Lechfeld was a wake-up call. It proved that the old way of life was no longer sustainable. The Magyars could no longer live as a tribe of nomadic raiders surrounded by increasingly powerful and organized Christian kingdoms. They had a choice: adapt or be destroyed. At the same time, the grasslands of the Pannonian Basin were not endless. Supporting a huge population of nomadic warriors and their horses was becoming difficult. They had to transition to a more settled, agricultural society, like their neighbors. The job of being a European terror was over. The job of becoming a European nation had to begin. The man who oversaw this difficult transition was Grand Prince Geza, who ruled from 972 to 997. He was a ruthless pragmatist. He knew that the key to survival was to integrate with the rest of Europe, and that meant one thing above all: adopting Western Christianity. He brutally suppressed the rival tribal chieftains who opposed his authority, centralizing power in his own hands. In 973, he sent envoys to Holy Roman Emperor Otto I, the same man who had defeated them at Lechfeld, and formally requested missionaries. Geza and his family were baptized, a political move designed to secure peace and an alliance with the most powerful ruler in Western Europe. Geza laid the foundation, but it was his son, Istvan, or Stephen, who finished the job. Geza arranged a critical marriage for Istvan to Gisela of Bavaria, the sister of the future Holy Roman Emperor. This move tied the new Hungarian dynasty directly to the heart of Christian European royalty. After Geza's death, Istvan had to fight a civil war against relatives who wanted to stick to the old pagan ways, but he won. In the year 1000 or 1001, with the blessing of the Pope, Istvan was crowned the first king of Hungary. He received a crown from Rome, a powerful symbol that his kingdom was now a recognized independent member of the family of Christian nations. The long, dirty, and bloody journey from a nomadic tribe in Siberia to a European kingdom was finally complete.